Breaking tonight, new questions emerging about whether the United States is heading for an armed showdown with Russia as Moscow starts giving the orders and dropping bombs in the Middle East. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Like a crisis from the Cold War, what started with a tense United Nations meeting on Monday has escalated into a day of dramatic breaking news from Washington, Syria, and Moscow. Earlier today, say U.S. officials, a three-star Russian general walked into the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Iraq, and told us we had an hour to get our people and our jets out of Syria, period. Sure enough, within an hour, Russian fighter jets were carrying out airstrikes in Syria on what they claimed was ISIS, but now we know different. With Washington in full scramble and warnings about possible military accidents between the U.S. and Russia, Secretary of State John Kerry addressed the UN Security Council at noon, saying the Obama administration supported the effort as long as Russia was attacking just the Islamic State terrorists. But late this afternoon, we learned that was not what was happening. Instead, the Russians may have targeted the one group of folks, the one group of folks in Syria that America actually supports. And they reportedly killed a couple of dozen civilians, including children, in the process. The U.S. Defense Secretary said it was, quote, unprofessional. Then, just hours ago, the administration sent out Secretary of State John Kerry, this time appearing with his Russian counterpart, to say, well, they had had a constructive meeting about our, quote, need for clarity, agreeing that, quote, we have a lot of work to do. As the crisis unfolds, we have tonight with us Senator Marco Rubio. He predicted this exact scenario 2 weeks ago. Also, former White House press secretary and co-host of The Five, Dana Perino, is here on how the Russians managed to pull this off and embarrass the United States, according to many. But we begin with retired four-star General Jack Keane, who was Vice Chief of Staff for the U.S. Army and is the current chairman at the Institute for the Study of War. General, thank you for being with us tonight.
Glad to be here, Megyn.
How bad is this? Put this in perspective.
Well, frankly, we have once again Putin, whose economy is in a tank, whose military is no match for the United States, who has outmaneuvered and outbluffed the president. He knows that the president will do nothing but verbal condemnation. What he's counting on is the president's predictable fear of escalation and fear of confrontation. This is a game changer. It's significant because what Putin is doing is changing the strategic shift in the Middle East in terms of the balance of power, in terms of the U.S. losing influence and Putin gaining influence of it. So it is a big deal, Megyn.
What we learned today is that they may say that they're going after ISIS, but they're not going after ISIS. And if you look at the map that you guys put together, this isn't your exact, but the green areas on this map are ISIS-controlled. See the little red things? That's where the Russians struck. Nowhere near the green areas. They're not striking the ISIS-controlled areas. They're striking areas within the Assad-controlled area that are frequented by the rebels, by the people we support, General.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Listen, the reason for Putin being here with his limited military capability is the fact that the rebels have been putting pressure on Assad, particularly Jabhat al-Nusra, from Aleppo to Damascus in that corridor there.
Hold on. Nobody understood what you just said. Say that in plain English.
The corridor north of Damascus that goes all the way up to the northern border with Syria and Turkey, the rebels have been putting huge pressure on that corridor. It's road networks, and they've taken control of it. And this has been happening gradually for a year. And the Iranians went up to see Putin and told him, listen, situation's getting worse for Assad. He's also losing some political support from the Alawites. We got to do something. Here comes Putin to do something. So that's what he's focused on. The false narrative, Megyn, so our audience understands it, is ISIS. ISIS is not why he's there. Now, eventually, will he attack some ISIS targets out in the Northeast? Likely. But the reason he's there and the focus of his effort will be to sustain the Assad regime in power. That gives him the foothold in the Middle East, and he desperately cannot lose that.
Who we hate and who Obama has said has got to go, but he said that back in 2012. He hasn't gone. Let me ask you this. What is the behind-the-scenes reaction at the Pentagon to what happened today?
Well, the Pentagon has been very frustrated for a long time. And, what Secretary Kerry did today, his conciliatory effort towards the Russians, makes no sense to me. What should have been said to the Russians. After all, they never coordinated any of this movement into Syria with us. They actually flew their fighters underneath their large cargo airplanes so that no one would pick up on radar. What should have been said today to him is, we're not having a coordination meeting. What we're going to do is we're going to fly when we want, where we want, and we do what we want. And what you should be prepared for is to avoid confrontation and stay out of the area. If you don't stay out of the area, then expect confrontation. We have got to assert ourselves. We're here to destroy ISIS, and we've got to get about doing that. And we all know the strategy's not right, and that's got to change. But there's so much we can do to assert ourselves and make certain that we're able to accomplish our mission and put Russia back on its heels where it needs to be.
It's a very provocative move by Putin. Is this... How much stress does this create between our relationship with Putin and with Russia?
Well, I just think it's added to his shenanigans back in 2013 when he created this masquerade of pulling the weapons out, the chemical weapons out of Syria. We've left production capability there. We've left weapons. It's added to Crimea. It's added to the Ukraine. This is another shoe that has dropped. Putin has had a different relationship with us for some time. We haven't made up our mind that this relationship has fundamentally changed.
General, always great getting your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's good seeing you, Megan.
Well, with Russia clearly winning round one in this Cold War-style showdown, it did not take long for the political writers to remind people about this moment from the 2012 debate between President Obama and Governor Mitt Romney. Watch.
A few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
Dana Perino is co-host of The Five, former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush, and author of And the Good News Is. And President Obama also said that ISIS was JV not long ago. And now the Russians are supposedly bombing the JV squad.
One of the things President Obama also says all the time is that these actors are on the wrong side of history. I think what we saw today is that President Obama, with a attitude of leading from behind, has put America on the wrong side of history in the Middle East. This was dramatic action. President Putin knew exactly what he was doing, waiting until, number one, President Obama was already in as far as he was going to be able to go with the Iranian deal. He would do nothing to disrupt that.
Because Iran wants this. Iran, as General Keane explained, they want Russia going in there and propping up this brutal dictator Assad. They like him. They're having a little alliance.
And Russia and the Iranians also are another alliance that Putin wants to strengthen very much. So they waited until the United Nations is here on the world stage. President Putin now is able to tell his audience back home, because that's his most important audience, that the domestic politics for him is important. He can say, look at the United States. They do nothing. I, on the other hand, come up with a solution, and I don't wait. 36 hours later, I'm bombing. Now, back home, they don't care in Russia that they're not bombing the ISIS targets. We care. But today, when when Foreign Minister Lavrov and Secretary Kerry, they're an hour late to get to their press conference.
Let's just watch it. Can we just watch it? So we're not doing nothing. We're not doing nothing. This is what we're doing. Watch.
We agreed that the military should get into contact with each other very soon.
We agreed on the imperative of as soon as possible, perhaps even as soon as tomorrow, but as soon as possible, having a military-to-military deconfliction discussion.
The deconfliction discussion is going to happen as soon as possible.
Yes, the State Department word salad is always a little bit hard to translate, but let me tell you what he said, which is, we are powerless because in this situation, I think the reason they wanted to appear together is that we have no choice but to try to show some sort of united effort, because if we don't want to escalate a problem with Russia as well, we have to try to at least somehow stay on the same page, but that Russia's in the lead.
You hear the difference between what General Keane said, we're going to fly where we want, when we want, period. And if you don't get out of our way, there's going to be a problem, versus we're going to have a deconfliction discussion just as soon as possible. And then even our Defense Department saying, This is very unprofessional. I mean, what are we going to do about it? Nothing from the sound of it.
Well, remember, this also goes back to the National Security Council. So, Susan Rice, call your office, because tonight is most important that they coordinate and get on the same page. You had Defense Department and State Department. They were totally caught unawares, and so they had different statements today. That's not a position of leadership or strength. So President Obama, I would hope in the morning, is going to have a National Security Council meeting. I would call it at 7:30 a.m. and make sure that he's out in front of the cameras at 8:15 and saying this will not stand. The interesting thing
But he can't say that unless he really means it.
That's right. What I was just going to say is it could be that Vladimir Putin finally pushes Barack Obama to do the right thing, which is to allow the Department of Defense to fight this fight the way that they've wanted to for several years. And remember, 250,000 people have died in this conflict. We have millions of refugees all over the world. You have to solve this problem at its source. You can't just do a speech on climate change at the United Nations and expect that these real-world problems of today are going to go away.
And this is very much also going to be even more of a 2016 campaign issue than it's already become.
President Obama is leaving his successor with a real mess if he doesn't get it fixed soon.
Dana, great to see you.
Thank you.
Well, 2 weeks ago, Senator Marco Rubio predicted exactly what we saw today. And he will join us in moments right after this break to talk about what may happen next. Plus, we have big news for the Republican field as we dig deeper on a whole series of brand new polls that just came out today. Chris Direwalt is here on who's rising, who's falling, and why voters are driving the change. And then a Black Lives Matter activist today appeared in court on a charge of making terroristic threats against police. We'll show you the video that got her in trouble and the defense she's now trying to offer.